My name is William Mercer, and according to my wife, I'm too boring for her friends to respect. She delivered this particular gem over breakfast on a Tuesday morning, stirring her coffee with the same casual indifference she might use to comment on the weather. "You're too boring for my friends to respect," Sandra announced, not bothering to look up from her phone where she was scrolling through social media posts from the previous night's gathering. A gathering I hadn't been invited to, naturally. I paused with my spoon halfway to my mouth, oatmeal dripping back into the bowl. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." She finally glanced up, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light streaming through our kitchen window. "Chloe was asking why you never come out with us anymore, and honestly, what was I supposed to say? That you'd rather spend your evenings in that garage tinkering with rusty car parts?" The garage. My sanctuary. Where I restored classic cars and built something meaningful with my hands instead of posting carefully curated lies on social media platforms. Where I ran a successful restoration business that paid for this house, her designer clothes, and those expensive dinners with friends who apparently found me beneath their notice. "Maybe because every time I do join you, your friends treat me like I'm invisible," I replied, setting down my spoon. Hard to feel welcome when Chloe spends the entire evening talking about cases at her law firm like she's arguing before the Supreme Court, and Brianna won't stop filming herself for her Instagram stories. Sandra rolled her eyes. "They're successful women, William. They have interesting lives. They travel, they have careers that matter, they contribute to conversations about things that actually make a difference in the world. And I don't? You fix old cars." She said it like I collected garbage for a living. "When was the last time you had an opinion about anything that wasn't related to engine specifications or paint restoration techniques?" I stared at her across our kitchen table, this woman I'd been married to for 12 years, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not heartbreak exactly, but recognition. The kind of clarity that comes when someone finally says out loud what you've suspected they've been thinking for months. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly. Sandra blinked, clearly expecting more of a fight. "Oh, well, good. I'm glad you can at least acknowledge it." She returned to her phone, dismissing me as effectively as if I'd ceased to exist. I finished my breakfast in silence, listening to the soft tapping of her manicured nails against the screen and the occasional snort of laughter at whatever amusing content her friends were sharing. After Sandra left for her job at the event planning company downtown, I sat alone in our kitchen, staring at the empty coffee mug she'd left on the table. She never cleaned up after herself anymore, always rushing off to meet clients or friends or whoever else populated her increasingly separate world. I was loading the dishwasher when I noticed her tablet on the counter, screen still glowing. Sandra lived on that thing, coordinating events, managing social media accounts, staying connected to the network of relationships that seemed to matter more to her than our marriage. The screen showed her group chat with Chloe, Brianna, and Alex. The conversation was still active, messages appearing every few seconds. I glanced toward the front door, confirming Sandra's car was gone, then looked back at the screen. The most recent message was from Brianna. "Girl, you looked amazing last night. That dress was everything." Sandra had replied with a string of heart-eye emojis and, "Thanks, babe. Felt so good to get out and have actual adult conversation for once." Adult conversation. As opposed to what we had at home, apparently. I should have closed the tablet and walked away. Should have respected her privacy and gone to work in my garage where I belonged. Instead, I scrolled up, curiosity getting the better of my moral compass. The conversation from the previous evening unfolded before me, like a car accident I couldn't look away from. Messages sent while I'd been in the garage, working late on a 1967 Mustang restoration, thinking my wife was having a quiet night at home. Chloe. "So glad Will didn't come tonight. No offense, but he's kind of a conversation stopper." Alex. "OMG, yes. Remember last time when he spent 20 minutes explaining the difference between original and reproduction chrome bumpers?" Brianna. I literally fell asleep with my eyes open. How do you deal with that every day, Sandra? Sandra. Trust me, it's not easy. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to my grandfather. My hands were shaking as I continued scrolling. The conversation got worse. Much worse. Sandra. He still wears those band t-shirts from college. College. We're almost 40. Alex. Girl, you need to take him shopping. Or better yet, find yourself a man who already knows how to dress. Brianna. Speaking of which, how's your fitness instructor situation? Still getting those private sessions? My stomach dropped. Fitness instructor situation. Private sessions. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Sandra. Ethan is, let's just say he's everything Will isn't. Confident, exciting, knows how to make a woman feel alive. Chloe. Details, woman. We need details. Sandra. Let's just say I finally remember what it feels like to be with a real man. Someone who doesn't think romance is explaining the proper way to apply car wax. The messages continued, each one a fresh slap across my face. Sandra describing intimate details of her affair with someone named Ethan. Her friends encouraging her, celebrating her betrayal like it was some kind of liberation movement. Alex. Will would probably die if he knew what you were really up to. Sandra. Honestly? Sometimes I wish he would find out. Maybe it would give him the push he needs to actually become interesting. Brianna. Or maybe it would give you the push you need to find someone better. Sandra. Don't think I haven't considered it. After my birthday party next month, I might just make some changes. Life's too short to spend it with someone who bores everyone to tears. I screenshotted everything. Every message, every cruel joke, every detail of her affair. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of documenting restoration projects taking over while my brain struggled to process what I was reading. The conversation continued in real time, messages appearing as Sandra and her friends started their workday. Sandra. Thanks for last night, ladies. I needed that reminder that there's a whole world of interesting people out there. Chloe. Always here for you, babe. You deserve so much better than boring. Boring. There was that word again. The word that apparently defined my entire existence in their eyes. I closed the tablet and walked to my garage, screenshots safely stored in my phone's memory. The 1967 Mustang sat waiting, its engine partially disassembled, chrome bumpers, original, not reproduction, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Boring. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was exactly as uninteresting as they believed. But boring people often have one advantage that more exciting individuals overlook. We pay attention to details. We document things carefully. We plan methodically. And sometimes we remember that the most devastating explosions come from the quietest places. Sandra's birthday party was 3 weeks away. She'd been planning it for months, inviting everyone who mattered in her social circle. 50 guests, she'd told me proudly, all the important people in her life. I picked up a wrench and got back to work on the Mustang's engine. 3 weeks would give me plenty of time to prepare something truly memorable for my wife's special day. Something that would prove, once and for all, that boring people could be very interesting indeed. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. Sandra continued her routine, work, gym sessions with Ethan, evenings out with the girls, while I played the role of the oblivious, boring husband. But underneath the surface, I was documenting everything. Mrs. Dalrymple, our 70-something neighbor, turned out to be an unexpected source of information. She'd lived on our street for 40 years and had elevated people watching to an art form. I'd always found her morning garden routine mildly annoying, the way she'd wave and want to chat whenever I left for work. Now, I saw the value in her observations. That young man with the fancy car has been visiting quite regularly, she mentioned one morning as I retrieved my newspaper. Very fit fellow. Drives one of those expensive sports cars that sounds like a lawnmower having a tantrum. Sports car? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Red convertible, parks right in your driveway like he owns the place. Usually comes by when your wife gets home from work, leaves around dinner time. She leaned on her garden hose, eyes twinkling with gossip-fueled excitement. Not that it's any of my business, of course. Of course not. Mrs. Dalrymple made everyone's business her business, which was exactly what I needed right now. Sandra mentioned she was getting some personal training sessions, I said carefully. Probably just discussing workout routines. Mrs. Dalrymple's expression suggested she had opinions about what kind of routines were being discussed, but she simply nodded. I'm sure that's it, dear. Though they do seem to have quite lengthy conversations, very animated discussions. That evening, I installed a small security camera in our home office, Sandra's social media command center, where she managed her event planning business and maintained her online presence. Nothing invasive, just a basic system to monitor our home while we were away. Completely legal and reasonable for a homeowner to install. The camera provided fascinating insights into Sandra's daily routine, like how Ethan visited every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, staying for exactly 2 hours. How Sandra would spend 30 minutes before his arrival applying makeup and changing into increasingly revealing workout clothes. How their fitness consultations involved very little discussion of actual fitness. But the real treasure trove remained her group chat with Chloe, Brianna, and Alex. Sandra's tablet lived on the kitchen counter, always logged in, always accessible when she stepped out for her morning runs or evening social obligations. The conversations grew more damaging by the day. Brianna posted the cutest story last night. You and Ethan looked so good together at the restaurant. My restaurant. The Italian place where Sandra and I had our first date, where we celebrated our anniversary every year until this one. Sandra. He's taking me places Will never would. Actually listens when I talk. Actually cares about my dreams and goals. Alex. Speaking of Will, has he figured anything out yet? Sandra. Please. The man thinks foreplay is explaining the historical significance of muscle car engine configurations. He wouldn't notice if I brought Ethan home and introduced him as my personal trainer. Chloe. Which technically you did. Sandra. Exactly. Will just nodded and went back to his stupid car magazines. Sometimes I think I could confess everything, and he'd just ask if Ethan knew anything about carburetor adjustment. They weren't wrong about my automotive obsessions, but they were catastrophically wrong about my observational skills. Every message was screenshotted, every detail documented. I was building a comprehensive archive of Sandra's betrayal, narrated in her own words. The group chat also revealed unflattering truths about Sandra's friends themselves. Apparently, loyalty was a flexible concept in their social circle. Sandra. Chloe, didn't you say your husband was being weird about money lately? Chloe. He's always weird about money. Thinks I spend too much on clothes and dinners out, like sorry for wanting to look professional and maintain a social life? Sandra. Men are so controlling about the stupidest things. Alex. At least your husband makes decent money. Mine still thinks we're college students living on ramen and hope. Brianna. This is why I stay single. All the fun, none of the boring domestic drama. Sandra. Easy to say when you're not stuck in a mortgage with someone who thinks excitement is finding an original air filter at a junkyard. But then the conversation would shift, and Sandra would share details about her friends that revealed her true feelings. Sandra. Brianna's whole Instagram lifestyle is such a joke. Half those designer bags are knockoffs, and she lives in a studio apartment that's smaller than our garage. Sandra. Alex keeps talking about her husband like he's some kind of loser, but at least he doesn't spend every weekend at his mother's house crying about his feelings like hers does. Sandra. Chloe acts like she's this big-shot lawyer, but she works for an insurance company reviewing fender-bender claims, hardly Supreme Court material. Each friend was mocked behind their back, their insecurities and failures dissected for Sandra's entertainment. The same loyalty she showed me, she showed them, which is to say, none at all. I compiled everything into a comprehensive presentation, screenshots organized chronologically, showing the progression of Sandra's affair and her increasing contempt for everyone in her life, her cruel assessments of her friends, her detailed descriptions of intimate moments with Ethan, her plans to leave our marriage after her birthday celebration. The birthday party itself had grown into a major production. Sandra had rented the community center, hired a catering service, even arranged for a DJ. 50 guests confirmed, including her entire social circle, several work colleagues, and both sets of parents. "It's going to be the party of the year," she told me excitedly, showing me the event planning checklist she'd created. "Everyone who matters will be there." Everyone who matters. I wondered if she included herself in that category, or if she'd burned through her own self-respect along with everyone else's. "Sounds like quite a celebration," I agreed. "I'm sure it will be memorable." "I hope so. I want this to be the kind of party people talk about for years." Oh, they would definitely be talking about it for years. 3 days before the party, I made my final preparations. The presentation was complete, loaded onto a flash drive and backed up in multiple locations. I'd tested the community center's audio-visual system during their open house event the previous weekend, confirming compatibility with my equipment. I also had a conversation with Tim, my apprentice at the garage. Tim was 25, built like a linebacker, and possessed the kind of straightforward loyalty that had become rare in my experience. "Boss, you sure about this?" he asked after I'd explained my plans. "I mean, she sounds like a real piece of work, but this is going to be pretty nuclear." "Tim, let me ask you something. If someone spent months mocking you to your face, betraying your trust, planning to destroy your life, what would you do?" "Probably punch them in the face." "Well, I'm not going to punch anyone. I'm just going to show people who Sandra really is, using her own words. Is that wrong?" Tim considered this, absently wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Nah, I guess not. If she said it, she owns it. Not your fault if people don't like what they hear." "Exactly. Sometimes the truth is the most devastating weapon you can use." "You want me to be there? You know, just in case things get weird?" I appreciated the offer, but this was something I needed to handle alone. "Thanks, but I think I can manage. Besides, someone needs to watch the shop." The night before Sandra's party, I lay in our bed listening to her excited phone calls with her friends, finalizing last-minute details and building anticipation for her special day. She was practically vibrating with excitement, talking about outfits and music and how perfect everything was going to be. "This is exactly what I needed," she told Chloe during their final planning call. "A celebration of everything good in my life, surrounded by people who actually appreciate me." I stared at the ceiling, thinking about appreciation and respect and the various ways people earn both. Sandra had spent months complaining that I was too boring for her friends to respect, but she'd never stopped to consider whether she'd done anything to earn my respect in return. Tomorrow, we'd find out what happened when boring people decided to become interesting. Tomorrow, Sandra would get the party of the year she'd been planning. Just not the kind she was expecting. Sandra spent the morning of her birthday party in a state of controlled chaos, rushing between hair appointments, last-minute errands, and frantic phone calls with the catering company. I maintained my role as the supportive, slightly clueless husband, offering to help with setup and generally staying out of her way. "The flowers should be delivered by 2, she announced, checking items off her elaborate to-do list. "The DJ will arrive at 4 to set up his equipment, and guests start arriving at 6. I need to be at the community center by 3 to oversee everything." "Sounds like you have it all planned perfectly," I said, sipping my coffee and reading the morning paper like this was any other Saturday. "I do. This is going to be absolutely perfect." She paused in her preparations to look at me seriously. "William, I know we haven't been..." I mean, things have been tense lately, but I want tonight to be special. Can you please just try to be social? Talk to people, engage with my friends, show them you're not completely boring? I supplied helpfully. I was going to say antisocial, but yes, show them you can be interesting when you want to be. Oh, I think tonight will definitely show people a different side of me. Sandra smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given me in months. Good. I'm glad. Maybe this party will be a fresh start for both of us. A fresh start. In a way, she was absolutely right. I arrived at the community center at 5:30, carrying my laptop bag and wearing the navy blue suit Sandra had picked out for me. The transformation of the space was impressive. Sandra really was talented at event planning. Elegant table settings, professional lighting, a dance floor cleared and ready for action. The DJ was testing his sound system, and the catering staff was arranging appetizers on silver platters. Everything looks beautiful, I told Sandra, who was directing the final preparations with military precision. Thank you. I think it's going to be perfect. She checked her watch. Guests should start arriving any minute. Are you ready for this? More ready than you know. The first arrivals were Sandra's work colleagues, followed quickly by Chloe, Brianna, and Alex, the core group that had provided such entertaining commentary about my marriage and personality over the past few weeks. Chloe looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's car payments. She air-kissed Sandra and handed her an elegantly wrapped gift. Happy birthday, gorgeous. This party is going to be amazing. Brianna was already filming herself, documenting her arrival for her social media followers. At the fabulous Sandra Mercer's birthday bash, this venue is absolutely stunning. She lowered her phone to hug Sandra. You look incredible, babe. Alex completed the trio, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and wearing the kind of smile that suggested she'd already started celebrating. The birthday queen herself. Are you ready for the best night ever? I watched from across the room as Sandra basked in their attention, laughing and posing for Brianna's endless stream of photos. They looked like the perfect group of successful, supportive friends. No one watching would guess the toxic undercurrent of mockery and betrayal that ran beneath their polished surface. More guests arrived steadily: neighbors, family members, Sandra's clients, my parents who'd driven up from Connecticut for the occasion. The room filled with conversation and laughter. The DJ started playing background music, and Sandra moved through the crowd like a graceful hostess, accepting birthday wishes and compliments on the party setup. I mingled appropriately, making small talk with people I'd known for years, accepting their polite inquiries about my work and the garage. Several people commented on how nice Sandra looked, how wonderful the party was, how lucky I was to have such an organized and social wife. She really outdid herself with this party, commented Janet Morrison, one of our neighbors. Sandra has such a talent for bringing people together. She certainly does, I agreed. She's very good at showing people exactly who she really is. Around 7:30, Sandra called for everyone's attention. The DJ lowered the music, and the crowd gathered around as she stood near the head table, glowing with happiness and champagne. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. Having all the people I care about in one place, celebrating with me, it means more than you know. This has been an incredible year of growth and change, and I'm so excited about what the future holds. Applause filled the room. Sandra's parents beamed with pride, her friends cheered enthusiastically, and everyone seemed genuinely happy to be part of her celebration. Before we continue with dinner and dancing, I wanted to take a moment to thank my husband William for supporting this party and for being here tonight. She gestured toward me, and I raised my hand in acknowledgement as people turned to smile at me. I know social events aren't really his thing, but he's made an effort to be part of this special evening. More polite applause. I nodded graciously, playing my part in Sandra's perfect birthday narrative. Now, let's eat, drink, and celebrate, Sandra concluded, raising her champagne glass as the crowd cheered. The catering staff began serving dinner, and I waited patiently through the meal, making appropriate conversation with the people at my table, watching Sandra hold court with her friends across the room. She was radiant, animated, clearly having the time of her life surrounded by people who, in her mind, actually appreciated her worth. After dinner, the DJ announced it was time for toasts and speeches. Several people stood to share fond memories and birthday wishes. Sandra's father gave a touching speech about watching his daughter grow into a successful, independent woman. Chloe offered elegant remarks about friendship and loyalty. Alex shared funny stories about their adventures together. Then I stood up. "I'd also like to say a few words about Sandra," I announced, pulling my laptop from its bag and connecting it to the DJ's projection system. If I could have everyone's attention for just a few minutes. Sandra looked surprised, but pleased. "William, you don't have to." "I want to," I assured her. "I think everyone here should know exactly what Sandra thinks about all of you." The screen behind me illuminated with the first screenshot from Sandra's group chat. Her message about Chloe appeared in large, clear text. Chloe acts like she's this big-shot lawyer, but she works for an insurance company reviewing fender-bender claims, hardly Supreme Court material. The room went quiet. Chloe's face turned pale as she read her own assessment displayed for everyone to see. "This is from Sandra's group chat with her closest friends," I explained conversationally, as if I were giving a presentation about carburetor specifications. "I thought you might be interested in her honest opinions about the people in her life." I clicked to the next slide. Alex's turn. "Alex keeps talking about her husband like he's some kind of loser, but at least he doesn't spend every weekend at his mother's house crying about his feelings like hers does." Alex's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. "William, stop this right now," Sandra hissed, but her voice was lost in the shocked murmur rippling through the crowd. Next slide. "Brianna's whole Instagram lifestyle is such a joke. Half those designer bags are knockoffs, and she lives in a studio apartment that's smaller than our garage." Brianna's phone clattered to the table as she stared at the screen in horror. "But wait," I continued cheerfully, "there's more. Sandra also had some interesting things to say about her marriage." The next series of screenshots showed Sandra's descriptions of our relationship. "Sometimes I feel like I'm married to my grandfather. He still wears those band t-shirts from college. College. We're almost 40. Will would probably die if he knew what I was really up to." Sandra was trying to reach the laptop, but I'd positioned myself strategically between her and the equipment. "William, please, stop this. You're ruining everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I replied calmly. "I'm just sharing your own words with the people you wrote about. Surely you're proud of your honest assessments." The final series of slides revealed Sandra's affair with Ethan, her detailed descriptions of their relationship, her plans to leave our marriage after the party, her friends' encouragement of her betrayal. Every cruel joke, every intimate detail, every moment of mockery displayed in high definition for her parents, her colleagues, her neighbors, and everyone else who'd come to celebrate her special day. The silence in the room was absolute. 50 people stared at the screen, then at Sandra, then back at the screen, processing the comprehensive destruction of every relationship she'd thought she could maintain through careful compartmentalization. Chloe was the first to move, standing abruptly and walking toward the exit without a word. Brianna followed, tears streaming down her face, her phone forgotten on the table. Alex grabbed her purse and coat, shooting Sandra a look of pure hatred before storming out. Sandra's parents sat frozen, staring at their daughter like they'd never seen her before. My parents looked uncomfortable, but unsurprised. They'd never particularly liked Sandra, though they'd been too polite to say so directly. "You're boring," Sandra had told me. "Too boring for my friends to respect." I closed the laptop and looked around the room at the remaining guests, most of whom were gathering their belongings and heading for the exits. "Well," I said to Sandra, who stood in the middle of her ruined party looking like she'd been struck by lightning, "I guess that was interesting enough for everyone." The community center emptied quickly after that, leaving Sandra and me alone with the catering staff and DJ, who were efficiently cleaning up the remnants of what should have been the party of the year. Sandra finally found her voice. "How could you do this to me?" "I didn't do anything to you," I replied, packing up my laptop. "I just showed people what you really think about them, using your own words. If you're embarrassed by what you said, maybe you shouldn't have said it. You've destroyed my life." "No, Sandra, you destroyed your life. I just made sure everyone else knew about it." She stood there in her beautiful dress, surrounded by the elegant decorations she'd spent months planning, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered every cruel joke, every moment of mockery, every time she'd made me feel small and worthless and boring. I remembered her plans to leave me after using this party as some kind of farewell celebration. "Happy birthday," I said, walking toward the exit. "I hope it was everything you wanted." Behind me, Sandra finally started to cry, but I didn't look back. I had a classic car waiting in my garage, and suddenly, working with my hands seemed like the most interesting thing in the world. The morning after Sandra's birthday party, I woke up alone in our bed for the first time in 12 years. Sandra had spent the night in the guest room, and from the sounds I'd heard through the walls, muffled phone calls and what might have been crying, she'd been trying to salvage the wreckage of her social life. I made coffee and sat in my kitchen, reading the newspaper like it was any other Sunday morning. The normalcy felt strange after the previous evening's dramatic conclusion, but also oddly peaceful. No tension, no walking on eggshells, no wondering what cruel assessment Sandra was sharing with her friends about my latest boring transgression. Around 10 o'clock, Sandra emerged from the guest room wearing yesterday's makeup and an expression of barely contained fury. "We need to talk," she announced. "Good morning to you too. Coffee's fresh if you want some." "Don't," she held up a hand. "Don't pretend like nothing happened. Don't act like you didn't just destroy 12 years of marriage in front of 50 people. I set down my newspaper and looked at her calmly. "Sandra, I didn't destroy our marriage. You did that months ago when you started having an affair and mocking me to your friends. I just made sure everyone knew about it. You humiliated me. You embarrassed my parents, ruined my friendships, destroyed my reputation in this town. How am I supposed to face anyone after what you did? The same way I was supposed to face your friends after months of them thinking I was too boring to deserve basic respect, I suppose." Sandra stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "That's completely different." "How is it different?" Because what they thought about you doesn't matter. They're not important people in your life. But they were important people in your life, and you encouraged them to mock and dismiss your husband. You shared intimate details of our marriage and your affair for their entertainment. How is that different from me sharing your actual words with people who thought they were your friends? Sandra opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, she seemed to realize she didn't have a good answer. "Chloe won't answer my calls," she said finally. "Neither will Brianna or Alex. My own friends won't speak to me." "Can you blame them? You spent months talking about them behind their backs, mocking their marriages, their jobs, their personal lives. Why would they want to maintain a friendship with someone who views them with such contempt?" I didn't mean those things. I was just venting, just blowing off steam. Everyone complains about their friends sometimes. "Sandra, you called Brianna's entire lifestyle a joke. You said Chloe was pretending to be more important than she really was. You mocked Alex's marriage and her husband's emotional problems. That wasn't venting. That was cruelty. She slumped into a chair across from me, suddenly looking older than her 37 years. What am I supposed to do now? My social life is over. My friends hate me. Everyone in town is going to be talking about this. You could try being honest for once. Apologize to the people you hurt. Take responsibility for your choices instead of blaming me for exposing them. Apologize? Sandra's voice rose. You want me to apologize for having private conversations with my friends? I want you to apologize for betraying your marriage, mocking people who trusted you, and spending months making me feel worthless in my own home. You are worthless! The words exploded out of her like a dam bursting. You're boring and predictable and completely satisfied with your small, pathetic little life. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to someone with no ambition, no interests beyond old cars, no desire to grow or change or become anything more than what you already are? I nodded slowly. There it is. The truth, finally. What? That's what you really think of me. Not what you told your friends to get sympathy or attention, but what you actually believe. That I'm worthless. Sandra's anger deflated slightly as she realized what she'd just admitted. William, I didn't mean… Yes, you did. And you know what? That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But you're not entitled to my respect or my support while you act on that opinion by having affairs and planning to leave our marriage. I stood up and refilled my coffee mug, taking my time with the cream and sugar while Sandra processed this. So what happens now? She asked quietly. Now you figure out what you want to do with your life, and I figure out what I want to do with mine, separately. You want a divorce. Sandra, you were planning to leave me after your birthday party anyway. I just accelerated your timeline and made sure you couldn't rewrite history to make yourself the victim. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the table. I never said I was definitely leaving. You said you were going to make some changes after the party. You told your friends life was too short to spend with someone boring. You've been having an affair for months. What exactly did you think was going to happen? I hoped maybe things would get better. Maybe you'd change, become more interesting, more engaged with life. Or maybe you'd realize that boring and stable isn't the worst thing a husband can be. Maybe you'd appreciate having someone who comes home every night, who's faithful, who's built a successful business and provided a comfortable life. I do appreciate those things. No, you don't. You appreciate the financial security and social respectability of being married, but you don't appreciate me. There's a difference. Sandra started crying then, not the angry tears from the night before, but something deeper and more desperate. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix this, Sandra. You can only decide what you want to do next. What if I want to try? What if I ended things with Ethan and we went to counseling and I really tried to make this work? I considered her question seriously, which seemed to surprise her. Do you actually want to try, or do you want to avoid the consequences of your choices? I don't know. Both, maybe. That's not enough. I spent months feeling like I wasn't good enough for you, like I was some kind of burden you had to tolerate. I'm not going through that again. So that's it? 12 years of marriage, and you're just done? Sandra, you were done months ago. You just hadn't figured out how to leave yet. She cried harder, and I felt a twinge of the old instinct to comfort her, to apologize for causing her pain, to take responsibility for problems I hadn't created. But I stayed in my chair, drinking my coffee and waiting for her to finish. I need time to think, she said eventually. Take all the time you need. I'll be in the garage. I spent the rest of Sunday working on the 1967 Mustang, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of mechanical problem solving. The engine was nearly complete, all the components cleaned and rebuilt, ready for reassembly. There was something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again, even if it was just a car. Around dinner time, Tim stopped by to check on me. How'd it go last night, boss? About as well as expected. Sandra's social life is over, Her friends won't speak to her, and she's finally admitting what she really thinks about our marriage. Sounds like mission accomplished. I suppose it is. Tim leaned against my workbench, studying my expression. You don't look like someone who just got revenge on his cheating wife. How am I supposed to look? I don't know. Happier, maybe? More satisfied? I considered this. I'm not unhappy, but I'm not celebrating either. Destroying someone's life, even someone who deserved it, isn't exactly cause for celebration. She destroyed her own life, boss. You just made sure everyone knew about it. That's what I keep telling myself. You having second thoughts? No. I'm having first thoughts about what comes next. Being right doesn't automatically make everything else easier. Tim nodded like he understood, though at 25 and single, I doubted he really did. You need anything? Help with the divorce lawyer? Someone to talk to? Whatever? Thanks, but I think I need to figure this out on my own. After Tim left, I worked until late in the evening, making steady progress on the Mustang's engine. The repetitive work was meditative, giving my mind space to process the events of the past 24 hours. Sandra had been right about one thing. I was boring and predictable and satisfied with my small life. But she'd been wrong about that being a weakness. Sometimes boring people were the most dangerous ones, because nobody expected them to fight back. I'd spent months feeling inadequate, wondering if I should try to become more exciting, more social, more worthy of respect from people whose opinions shouldn't have mattered to me. Now I realized the problem hadn't been my personality. The problem had been my willingness to accept disrespect from someone who'd promised to love and honor me. Sandra could have her exciting life with exciting people. I'd keep my boring garage and my boring cars and my boring but honest existence. At least boring people knew who they really were. Monday morning brought the first real test of my new reality. Sandra emerged from the guest room dressed for work, moving through our kitchen with careful politeness, like we were strangers sharing a hotel breakfast buffet. I'm going to stay at my sister's for a few days, she announced, not meeting my eyes. Give us both some space to think. Probably a good idea. I'll call you later this week. We need to discuss logistics. Logistics, divorce proceedings, property division, the dismantling of 12 years of shared life reduced to administrative details. After Sandra left, I called my lawyer, Jim Morrison, Janet Morrison's husband, and a guy I'd known since high school. Jim handled mostly real estate and small business contracts, but he'd be able to point me towards someone who specialized in family law. Will, I heard about Saturday night, Jim said after I'd explained why I was calling. Janet came home with quite a story. I imagine she did. Look, I'm not going to pretend to understand what happened between you and Sandra, but publicly humiliating your wife at her birthday party probably isn't going to help your case in divorce proceedings. Jim, I didn't humiliate Sandra. I shared her own words with people she'd been talking about. If she's humiliated, it's because she's embarrassed by what she actually said and did. That's a fine moral distinction, but family court judges don't always appreciate fine moral distinctions. They tend to focus on who looks like the reasonable party and who looks vindictive. So I should have just quietly accepted being cheated on and mocked. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there might have been better ways to handle it. Jim gave me the name of a family law attorney in the next town over, someone with a reputation for being thorough and aggressive when necessary. I made an appointment for later in the week. The rest of Monday passed quietly. I worked in the garage, caught up on paperwork, and tried to adjust to the strange silence of a house without Sandra's constant phone conversations and social media activity. Tuesday brought my first real glimpse of how the fallout from Saturday night was spreading through our small town. Mrs. Dalrymple appeared at my garage door around mid-morning, carrying a plate of homemade cookies and wearing an expression of barely contained curiosity. William, dear, I hope you don't mind me stopping by, but I wanted to see how you were holding up after the weekend. I'm doing fine, Mrs. Dalrymple. Thank you for asking. I heard Sandra's staying with her sister now. News travels fast. Oh, you know how it is in a small town. People talk. She set the cookies on my workbench and settled into the folding chair I kept for customers. I also heard there was quite a scene at her birthday party. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and looked at her directly. Mrs. Dalrymple, I'm sure you've heard all sorts of stories about what happened Saturday night. Most of them are probably true. I see. She nodded sagely. And how are you feeling about all of this? Honestly, I'm feeling like I should have paid more attention to what was happening in my own marriage instead of assuming Sandra was just going through a phase. Sometimes we see what we want to see, dear, especially when the alternative is too painful to consider. Mrs. Dalrymple had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things that was both comforting and unnerving. I suppose that's true. For what it's worth, I never thought Sandra appreciated what she had with you. You're a good man, William. Steady, reliable, honest. Those aren't exciting qualities, but they're rare ones. Apparently not rare enough to keep a marriage together. Oh, nonsense. The right woman would appreciate those qualities. Sandra just wasn't the right woman. After Mrs. Dalrymple left, I found myself thinking about her words while I worked on the Mustang. The engine was nearly complete now, all the components rebuilt and ready for installation. Soon, I'd be able to fire it up and hear how it sounded, whether all the careful restoration work had been worth the effort. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor, Ethan Grant himself, Sandra's fitness instructor and affair partner. I was working under the hood of a customer's Camaro when I heard an unfamiliar car pull into the parking area behind my garage. Ethan looked exactly like I'd expected from Sandra's descriptions. Tall, muscular, perfectly styled hair, and the kind of confident swagger that suggested he'd never encountered a problem he couldn't charm or flex his way out of. He was also clearly nervous, which was interesting. "You must be William," he said, approaching my workbench with his hands visible and his tone carefully neutral. "And you must be Ethan, Sandra's personal trainer." He flinched slightly at the emphasis I put on personal. "Look, man, I think we need to talk." "Do we? I can't think of anything we need to discuss." Saturday night was pretty intense. Sandra's really upset about what happened. I set down my wrench and looked at him directly. Sandra's upset that everyone found out what she really thinks about them. That's different from being upset about what she did. She made some mistakes, okay? But what you did at that party was pretty harsh. Harsh how? I showed people her own words. If she thinks her own words were harsh, maybe she shouldn't have said them. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly not prepared for this level of directness. "She's talking about leaving town, starting over somewhere else. Is that what you want?" "What I want is for my wife to stop having an affair and mocking me to her friends. Since that doesn't seem to be an option, what Sandra does next is entirely up to her. Look, I know this situation is messed up, but Sandra really cares about you. She's just been confused, going through a rough patch." I almost laughed. "Ethan, Sandra spent months telling her friends that I was boring and worthless and that life was too short to waste on someone like me. She described intimate details of your relationship for their entertainment. She was planning to leave our marriage after her birthday party. Which part of that suggests she cares about me?" People say things they don't mean when they're frustrated. For months? In detailed, consistent patterns? While having an affair? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. He stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something else, then apparently thought better of it. "Just maybe consider that everyone makes mistakes," he said finally. "You're right. Everyone makes mistakes. Sandra made the mistake of thinking she could betray and mock her husband without consequences. You made the mistake of getting involved with a married woman. I made the mistake of tolerating disrespect for months instead of addressing it directly. So, what happens now? Now, Sandra and I get divorced. You two can pursue your relationship without the complication of her being married, and I go back to my boring but honest life. Everyone gets what they wanted. Ethan left after that, and I went back to work on the Camaro. But his visit had clarified something for me. Sandra was trying to control the narrative, to position herself as the victim of my cruel revenge rather than the architect of her own destruction. It wouldn't work. Too many people had seen the screenshots, heard her actual words, witnessed her reaction when confronted with her own behavior. But it was interesting to see her try. Thursday morning brought a call from Sandra herself. "William, we need to talk. Really talk, not just logistics. I'm listening. I want to come home. I want to try to work this out." I set down my coffee and considered her words carefully. What's changed since Sunday? I've had time to think, to realize what I'm throwing away. We've been together for 12 years, William. That has to count for something. It counted for something right up until you decided it didn't. What's different now? I ended things with Ethan, completely. It's over. Because you want to save our marriage, or because everyone knows about the affair now? Sandra was quiet for a moment. Does it matter why? Yes, it matters. If you're ending the affair because you realize it was wrong and you want to rebuild our relationship, that's one thing. If you're ending it because continuing would be socially awkward now that everyone knows, that's something else entirely. I realize I made mistakes. Sandra, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. For months, you chose to have an affair. You chose to mock me to your friends. You chose to plan a future that didn't include me. Those weren't accidents or errors in judgment. They were deliberate decisions. People can change, William. I can change. Into what? Someone who respects her husband? Someone who values honesty and loyalty? You had 12 years to be that person, and you chose not to be. So you won't even consider trying. I thought about Mrs. Dalrymple's words about seeing what we want to see instead of what's actually there. Sandra, answer one question honestly. Do you actually want to be married to me, or do you just want to avoid the consequences of not being married to me? That's not fair. It's completely fair. It's the only question that matters. Sandra was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she said finally. I honestly don't know. Then you have your answer. When you figure out what you actually want, instead of what you think you should want, call me back. I hung up and went back to work on the Mustang. The engine was finally ready for installation, all the components perfectly restored and calibrated. Soon, I'd find out if all the careful work had been worth the effort. Some things were worth rebuilding. Others were better off scrapped and replaced with something more reliable. The trick was knowing the difference. Friday afternoon brought the kind of autumn weather that made New England famous. Crisp air, brilliant foliage, and the sense that change was inevitable, whether you welcomed it or not. I was installing the rebuilt engine in the 1967 Mustang when Tim arrived with coffee and the latest town gossip. Boss, you're not going to believe what happened at Murphy's bar last night. Murphy's was the local establishment where Sandra's social circle used to hold their weekly gatherings. I hadn't been there in months, not since it became clear I wasn't welcome in that particular group. Let me guess, Sandra showed up trying to reconcile with her former friends? Close. Ethan showed up drunk off his rear end, telling everyone who'd listened that you threatened him and sabotaged his car. I looked up from the engine compartment. I never threatened Ethan, and I certainly didn't sabotage his car. I know that, and apparently everyone else knew it too. Guy made a complete fool of himself. Started ranting about how you're some kind of psycho who destroyed Sandra's life out of jealousy. How'd that go over? About as well as you'd expect. Half the bar had been at Sandra's party, so they knew exactly what kind of person she really was. The other half had heard the stories by now. Nobody was buying Ethan's victim routine. Tim handed me a wrench and continued his report. Best part was when Chloe showed up. Chloe was at Murphy's? Apparently she's been going there every night this week, drinking alone and looking miserable. Last night she heard Ethan's sob story and decided to share a few thoughts of her own. I could imagine how that conversation had gone. Chloe had always been the most articulate of Sandra's friends, and she'd also been the most devastated by the revelation of Sandra's true opinions. She told everyone about the group chat, about how Sandra had been mocking all of them for months, shared some specific examples that weren't in your slideshow, really painted a picture of what kind of friend Sandra had been. That must have been uncomfortable for Ethan. Oh, it gets better. Turns out Chloe had been suspicious about Sandra's behavior for weeks. She'd noticed Sandra being secretive, making excuses to skip group activities, acting weird about her phone. She'd even driven by your house a few times and seen Ethan's car in the driveway. I stopped working and gave Tim my full attention. She knew about the affair? She suspected, but she didn't want to believe her best friend would do something like that. So she kept quiet, until Saturday night, when she realized Sandra had been playing everyone for fools. What happened after Chloe's revelation? Ethan tried to argue with her, said Sandra really loved you and was just confused. Chloe laughed in his face and told him Sandra had described him as good for one thing, and even that wasn't particularly impressive. I winced. Even for Sandra, that was harsh. Ethan got mad, started yelling about how Sandra was going to leave you anyway, how she'd been planning it for months, really destroyed any remaining sympathy people might have had for either of them. So now the whole town knows Sandra was planning to leave after her birthday party. Pretty much, and they know you didn't ruin her marriage, you just exposed what she'd already done to it. Tim helped me finish installing the engine while he continued his report. Apparently, Sandra's reputation in town was completely destroyed. Her event planning business was losing clients, her social invitations had dried up completely, and even casual acquaintances were treating her with cool politeness at best. She brought it on herself, Tim concluded, but it's still pretty brutal to watch someone's entire life fall apart like that. I didn't want to destroy her life. I just wanted people to know who she really was. Same thing, in this case. That evening, I was cleaning up the garage when Sandra appeared in the doorway. She looked terrible, exhausted, hollow-eyed, and wearing clothes that suggested she'd been sleeping in them. I heard about what happened at Murphy's last night, she said without preamble. Tim told me. Sounds like Ethan didn't handle the situation very well. He's leaving town, got a job offer in California, says he needs a fresh start. Probably for the best. Sandra walked into the garage and sat down heavily in the customer chair. Everyone hates me, William. My friends, my clients, people I've known for years. I can't go anywhere without people staring and whispering. I'm sorry you're going through that. Are you? Really? I considered her question seriously. I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm not sorry that people know the truth about how you've been treating the people in your life. The truth? Sandra laughed bitterly. The truth is that I was unhappy and made some bad decisions, but you've turned me into the villain in some kind of morality play. Sandra, you spent months having an affair, mocking your husband, and planning to abandon your marriage. You betrayed every friend you had by talking about them behind their backs. I didn't turn you into a villain, I just made sure people knew what you'd been doing. So this is it? You get your revenge, I lose everything, and you go back to your perfect little life? My life was never perfect, but it was honest. That's apparently more than I can say about yours. Sandra was quiet for a moment, staring at the Mustang with its newly installed engine. You always loved these old cars more than you loved me. That's not true, isn't it? You spend every free moment out here working on machines that can't disappoint you or challenge you or ask you to grow. I work on cars because I'm good at it, because it's satisfying to take something broken and make it work again, and because it's my business, the business that supported us for 12 years. It's also your escape, your way of avoiding real human connection. I felt a familiar flash of anger, the same feeling I'd experienced every time Sandra had dismissed my work as somehow less important than her social activities. Real human connection? Like the connection you had with your friends while you were mocking them behind their backs? Like the connection you had with me while you were having an affair? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. You've always looked down on what I do, always treated my interests like they were somehow inferior to yours. But at least when I rebuild an engine, it stays rebuilt. It doesn't betray me, or lie to me, or mock me to other engines. Sandra stood up abruptly. I came here to see if there was any chance we could work this out. I guess I have my answer. Sandra, you didn't come here to work things out. You came here because your life has fallen apart and you're looking for someone to blame besides yourself. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am looking for someone to blame. But you know what? You're not blameless in this either. How am I to blame for your affair? You're to blame for being so completely satisfied with mediocrity that you never pushed me to be better, never challenged me to grow, never made me feel like I was anything more than a convenient accessory to your boring little existence. There it was again. Boring. The word that had started this entire mess. Sandra, I never tried to hold you back from anything. You wanted to start an event planning business, I supported you. You wanted to travel, we traveled. You wanted a bigger social circle, I encouraged you to make friends. What I didn't do was change my fundamental personality to make you feel more excited about being married to me. And look how that worked out. Yeah, look how it worked out. You had an affair, betrayed your friends, and destroyed your own reputation, all because you couldn't appreciate what you had. Sandra walked toward the garage door, then turned back. I'm filing for divorce next week. I want half of everything, the house, the business, all of it. You're welcome to try, but adultery is still a factor in divorce proceedings, and I have plenty of documentation of your affair. You recorded everything, didn't you? Every private moment, every personal conversation. I documented your betrayal of our marriage using your own words from your own group chat. If you consider that a violation of privacy, maybe you shouldn't have written those things down. Sandra stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something change in her expression. The last trace of the woman I'd married 12 years ago disappeared, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. You think you've won, she said quietly. You think you've gotten your perfect revenge, and now you can go back to your simple little life. But you know what, William? You're still going to be exactly what you always were. A boring, small-minded man who's afraid of anything that might challenge him to become more than he is. Maybe you're right, I replied. But I'd rather be boring and honest than exciting and cruel. Sandra left after that, and I went back to work on the Mustang. The engine was installed, all the connections were made, and it was time for the moment of truth. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life with a deep, powerful sound that filled the garage. Perfect. After months of careful work, everything was functioning exactly as it should. Some things were worth the effort to rebuild, others were better off left in the past where they belonged. I sat in the driver's seat of the restored Mustang, listening to the engine idle smoothly, and realized that for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. Boring, maybe, but finally honestly myself, and that was more than enough.